is going on, everybody? What is going on? The Catch fam, my name is John Dawson, and in today's video, we will be breaking down 5 must-start defenses and streams for Week 10 of the 2023 fantasy football season. If you guys are new to the channel, this is all we do here all year round: free fantasy football content, redraft, dynasty, and best ball. If you guys are into that, be sure to subscribe on the way in. But most importantly, get in the comment section down below anything that you guys need: start, sits, trades, waivers, roster reviews. What defenses are you guys starting this week? Whatever it may be, let me know in the comments down below and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Without further ado, let's hop right into today's video. All right, first on the list is the Baltimore Ravens. If you own them, which they are 88% rostered, you're probably starting them regardless. But I do want to talk about them today. They come in as the second-ranked defense overall in fantasy football at the moment, coming off of a big performance against a pretty good Seattle Seahawks offense with 16 fantasy points, 2 turnovers in that game, as well as 4 sacks, and they only allowed 151 total yards of offense. Here in Week 10, they get the Cleveland Browns at home. And, I don't want to mention them because the Browns looked much more competent offensively last week with Deshaun Watson as a starter. We saw Amari Cooper find the end zone, David Njoku, Kareem Hunt. Good offensive performance for the Browns in Week 9, but that was against the Arizona Cardinals, one of the worst defenses in the league from a fantasy perspective all season long. This will not be the case in Week 10 for the Browns going up against the Ravens in an away game. This is a great spot for the Ravens. Deshaun Watson looked good last week, but he hasn't been perfect throughout the season. I would not be worried about this Browns offense whatsoever. If you own the Ravens, continue to roll with them in Week 10. And on the other hand, if you own the Browns, who come in as a defense 4 so far in fantasy, it's a tougher matchup against this Ravens offense, which is kind of rolling on all cylinders, has been very consistent. But I still think if you own the Browns, they're okay to start in this matchup as well. But I'll give the edge to the Ravens as the better defense to start this week between the two as we approach Week 10. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the Seattle Seahawks. And this is a pretty rough week in terms of streaming options. But, bad performance in Week 9 for the Seahawks at the Ravens. Looked absolutely awful. Gave up 515 yards of total offense. I mean, they did have 2 forced fumbles and 2 fumble recoveries, a sack, but just still an awful day and an awful fantasy performance with just 3 fantasy points total. This has still been a top 12 unit defensively from a fantasy football perspective all season long. This week in Week 10, they're at home against the Washington Commanders. This Washington Commanders team, nothing to sneeze at offensively. Sam Howell's been rolling. Receivers and run game look pretty good for Washington. Logan Thomas playing fine at tight end. But the Seahawks played so well defensively through the month of October that I just think they have a nice chance to bounce back in Week 10. I don't think they have a super high ceiling, but I think that they can cause some turnovers, get some sacks in this game. We know that this Washington Commanders offensive line has had some issues throughout the entire season. And, going into Week 9 against Baltimore, a lot of teams dropped the Seattle Seahawks on their rosters, and a lot of people are going to continue to drop them after such a bad performance in Week 9 against the Baltimore Ravens. So if Seattle's out there, if you're in need of a streaming option, I absolutely think that they're worth starting this week. Like I said, I'm not expecting a crazy high ceiling, but I think they get you a pretty safe floor as we approach Week 10. All right, next up on the list, we've got the Las Vegas Raiders, who will be hosting the New York Jets in Week 10. And at the time I'm recording this, Monday Night Football has not been played, so don't really know how Zach Wilson's going to be looking heading into this matchup. And listen, I'm not sneezing at the Jets. I've said it all season long. I still think Garrett Wilson, Breece Hall are going to be playmakers throughout the year. And Zach Wilson, leading up to Week 9, at least, has looked competent, right? Going into Week 10, whether Zach Wilson has a good night on Monday Night Football or not, I still like the Raiders. They've been a top 15 unit for the past couple of weeks from fantasy scoring, from a defensive perspective. They're coming off of 2 double-digit performances against the Lions and against the Giants. So 2 very different teams there. One looking great, one looking really bad. But at the end of the day, 8 total sacks for the Raiders in Week 9, just absolutely crazy. A forced fumble and 2 interceptions. The week before that, 2 forced fumbles an interception, and a sack against the Lions. So I don't really see why that pace would slow down here in week 10 against the Jets. I mean, after that, they get the Dolphins and the Chiefs. So expected to slow down then, but I think at home against the Jets, the Raiders currently 26% rostered. If you need a streaming option, they're a viable option out there on the waiver. Go scoop them up while you can as we approach week 10. All right, next up on the list, I'm going to talk about the Jacksonville Jaguars, down to 19% rostered according to the Sleeper app after being on bye week in week 9. So look around. They might be available for you. They're ranked as the 10th best unit defensively from fantasy scoring, from a defensive perspective at the moment. So double digits in every game except for one since week 4. They've been causing turnovers. They've been getting plenty of sacks. It's been a pretty stout unit all year long. And this is a tough matchup in week 10. We know this is San Francisco 49ers team. Very good, whether we're looking at the wide receivers, Christian McCaffrey. I mean, Brock Purdy hasn't been great lately, but he's been good enough. You got George Kittle. I mean, come on. We know what the Niners have, right? But I think that a lot of fantasy managers are going to look at this matchup and just simply not even give the Jaguars a chance. But I think that they actually have a chance to have a pretty good day in week 10 at home against the Niners, okay? I mean, for example, they gave up 24 points in week 7 against the Saints, 407 total yards, and they still had 10 fantasy points. The week before, 354 yards allowed, 20 total points allowed, and they still had 12 fantasy points. So ultimately, they are just one of these defenses that can give you a safe floor, even if they're bending throughout the game quite a bit. They've been very stout against the run. I don't know if I really trust that against Christian McCaffrey, but all I'm saying is, guys, it's a really bad week for streaming defenses. There's a lot of good defenses on bye this week. If you're desperate, I do think the Jaguars are worth a shot as we approach week 10. All right, last but not least, we're going to talk about the Detroit Lions, currently 23% rostered according to the Sleeper app. And once again, another unit that's been pretty good throughout the season that got dropped by a lot of fantasy managers because they're on bye week in week 9. And now they have a pretty steep matchup against the Chargers in week 10. So, I mean, this is basically kind of coming from the same perspective as what we just talked about with the Jacksonville Jaguars, okay? The Lions have given you 9 or more fantasy points every single game since week 3, except for week 7 against the Ravens, where they looked awful. But outside of that, double digits in every single one of those games, except for week 5 and week 7. So they've given you a pretty consistent floor throughout the year. They've had a pretty decent ceiling with 17 fantasy points as their highest scoring game. And when we go into this matchup against the Chargers, I mean, yeah, it's an away game. We don't like that. We know that Austin Eckler is going to be great running the football, even though that this Lions unit has been one of the best units in the league against opposing running backs. We know that there's playmakers in terms of the wide receiver and tight end position, and we know that Justin Herbert can sling the football. But at the end of the day, once again, it's just not a good week for fantasy defenses. Combined with the teams that are on bye and combined with a lot of the matchups, and the streaming options are really thin. So if the Lions got dropped in your league, I think they're at least worth a shot. They can give you a decent floor as we approach week 10. And that'll do it for today's video. If you guys did enjoy the content today or find it helpful, be sure to subscribe on the way out, but more importantly, get in the comment section down below. Let me know what defenses you guys are looking to start this week. Let me know what defenses are out there on the waiver wire. Like I said, there's a couple coming off of bye weeks. I know that there are a couple good units on bye this current week. Let me know what you guys are looking at for the defensive team position this week. But also, if you guys have questions at any other position, starts, sits, trades, roster reviews, waiver wire questions, whatever you guys need, let me know in the comments section down below. I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. With that, I will say thank you guys so much for watching and or listening. And remember, you saw it here on The Catch.